Hello there and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we are taking a look at the slowest cars here in Forza Motorsport 7. Do strap yourselves in, this is going to be a long one, which is kind of ironic when you consider how small our first car is. It is the 1957 Bmw Isetta 300, 13 horsepower, 14 foot-pound torque, 920 pounds of weight. This is the least powerful car here today, the least torquey car here today, and the lightest car here today, and I believe it's all three of them things in the game as a whole. I don't think there's anything lighter. There's a couple of cars that come close, the Lotus 11 and a couple of the older F1 cars, but power-wise, yeah, there is nothing that rivals this. This thing has almost half the horsepower that anything else has in this game, and I'm talking about on the real low end. Like, the next lowest car has about half the horsepower, or has double the horsepower this does, which is pretty incredible. The BMW Isetta, of course, a car often mistaken for being a freewheeler. This one is in fact a four-wheeler. I think some of them were freewheels. I think the original was freewheel, and then BMW got the license from the Italians to build this in Germany and put an extra wheel on the back of it, I believe, for extra stability, which makes sense because freewheel cars aren't particularly stable. This, of course, being famous for being able to be driven on a motorcycle license, similar to your Reliance and, well, some of your Reliance and so on and so forth. Yeah, the Isetta, a pretty interesting car. Of course, this car has been in the game since Forza Motorsport 6. And has been kind of the fun little silly car, although in this game it actually is somewhat viable when it comes to racing. It's a lot more secure than it was in previous games if you chuck upgrades in it, but driving it stock, I mean, it can't really upset itself too much. It is so very, very slow that you can't have any bad handling traits in this car. In fact, fun fact about this, I used the brakes 3 times in this. 3 times, that's it. I used them on the second corner, braking into the hammerhead, and then once again on the last corner, I believe. I might have even used them twice, come to think of it. Everywhere else you are entirely flat out. The first corner, you're flat out through. This second to last corner here, completely flat out. I had to take a new line in some of these slower cars because there's no real point of braking and going for the curb. I actually found it more effective to basically turn into the corner at full speed and just try to loop around onto the road. That actually seemed to be the faster route and the easier route when it came to most of these cars here today. Next up, well, we don't get that much quicker. It's the 1968 Subaru 360, 25 horsepower, 25 foot-pound torque, 1,143 pounds of weight. Of course, this one was DLC back in January, I believe. A car I was very excited to see. Of course, the mighty Subaru 360. The next couple of cars, this is actually the battle of the people's car to find out what is the best people's car. Of course, we had the Germans. The Volkswagen Beetle has already gone around very, very early on in the Top Gear Laps world, and now we've got a couple of cars. This is Japan's entry, the mighty 360. Yeah, it's a car I do rather like. It upgraded, this thing's actually really bloody good. Stock, of course, it's very slow. However, I'm just going to throw this caveat around here, out here already. This car is stupid amounts of fun to drive. Yes, it's slow, it's painfully slow. You know, coming down the straights, it's ridiculously slow. I mean, I drove this after I drove the Isetta, so to be fair, compared to the Isetta, this thing feels massively quick, but it's still extremely slow. But I tell you what, because of the amount of body roll it's got, and the tyres are actually really grippy on this thing, I just found it so much fun to basically just drop a gear, chuck it into a corner and let the mechanical grip take it round. It's very good at doing that. It's huge amounts of fun. I don't think I've had this much fun in a car here in Forza for a long time. It probably ranks quite highly on the most fun cars in this game, which is ironic to say because it has literally 25 horsepower. I don't quite know what it's like if you sort of let the stock suspension put more power through. I don't know if that would make it more fun or if that would just basically completely ruin the whole point of the car. It's basically ruin handling and so on and so forth. But stock, yeah, this thing is hilarious amounts of fun. I recommend driving the 360. Actually, you know, give this car a go. It is huge amounts of fun. It will put a smile on your face, the little 360, as if looking at it doesn't already do it, because yeah, the 360 is it's a fun little car, certainly. Next up, we have France's entry into the people's car world. This is the Citroen 2CV. More specifically, it's a 1970 Citroen 2CV with 33 horsepower, 31 foot-pound torque, 1,504 pounds of weight. This one is interesting. It is the only front-wheel drive car here today. Of course, this is a later model of the 2CV with the upgraded 33 horsepower. I believe that was the most powerful the 2CV ever got. If you got one of the original ones, this was producing, I think it was around about 10 horsepower. Yeah, not a quick car. It's a 2-cylinder as well, so it sounds awful. I think most of the cars that we've seen, the Isetta's got 1-cylinder, 360 is a 2-cylinder, 2CV is 2-cylinder. The next car's a 2-cylinder as well, I believe. So yeah, not many cylinder count here today. In fact, this episode is probably going to be the episode known for being the shortest on cylinders in the entire series. But yeah, the 2CV, of course, French icon, blah blah blah, farmer's field, blah blah blah, whatever. Yeah. That being said about the farmer's field and soft suspension, whatever, that's sort of what this car's known for. I will say, stock, this thing is actually quite surprising. It's not as soft as you'd think. In fact, the suspension is pretty darn solidly set up. We sort of seen the 360 have a massive leaning fit a couple of minutes ago, and that made that car super fun. But this car, yeah, it doesn't actually lean or roll into the corners as much as you'd expect. There is, of course, a little bit of suspension movement. It's not a race car or anything like that, but it's surprisingly firm, surprisingly solid. It's slow, of course it's slow. You'd think maybe the front-wheel drive handling would be a little bit of a detriment, but to be honest with you, it's not powerful enough to really spin the front wheels or anything like that. It felt pretty secure, nowhere near as fun as the 360 was to drive, but, you know, it's still a solid enough car to drive. Again, as I said previously with the Isetta and so on and so forth, they haven't really got enough power to really have any adverse handling yet. Next up, we have the 1968 Abarth 595 SSE. I think that's how that's said. I can't quite remember. SSE, something like that. I've completely forgotten. As soon as I usually remember it, but for some reason my mind's gone blank when it came to recording this episode. Anyway, 28 horsepower, 34 foot-pound torque, 1,257 pounds of weight. So this is Italy's attempt at the people car, of course, the mighty Fiat 500. Probably one of the most famous people's cars as well, probably behind the Beetle. Yeah, everyone loves the little 500. I do too. I think it's a fantastic little car. I'd kind of like to own sort of a classic 500. I will admit, this one is cheating a little bit. This is the Abarth version of the Fiat 500, and I believe this is one of the very first examples of a modified production car. Abarth basically took the little Fiat 500, stuck more power for it, and I think they did a few other little tweaks to it, and then sort of chucked it out again. And yeah, the Abarth 595, basically known as the first sort of true modified people's cars, I guess, sort of the modified cars that people could actually afford. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting car in that regard. As far as it goes to drive, well, with 28 horsepower and 34 foot-pound of torque, it is essentially, because again, rear engine, 2-cylinder, all the rest of it, it basically drives like a faster Subaru 360, which I'm not complaining about, because like the 360, this thing's a lot of fun. I don't think it's quite as fun as the 360 through the corners, but it doesn't really lean as much, so it's actually quicker through the corners. Yeah, it is a phenomenal, it's still a fun car though, don't get me wrong. Like, as much as it isn't quite as much fun as I had in the 360, this car is still a hilarious amount of fun to just sort of chuck through the corners and let it hook up and grip. It actually does have a surprising amount of grip as well. Yeah, I really liked driving the little Abarth. You can see it really leaning through the corner there. Yeah, I said it was not quite as soft as the 360, but certainly not by much. Yeah, this is still quite a soft, rolly, fun little car, and another one that I'd recommend that you try out. Next out, the 1951 Holden Fx Ute. 60 horsepower, 99 foot-pound of torque, 2,282 pounds of weight. I guess this is the Australian people's car. I mean, they're known for their Utes and Holden, of course. This was the first Holden Ute, I believe. I could be wrong on that. I don't really know too much about the FX. I also want to say it's a 4-cylinder, but I could be wrong on that. Yeah, 1951 Ute utility vehicle. Yeah, big, heavy. It's got double the horsepower from the Abarth and most of the other things that we just saw. However, it does weigh an extra 1,000 pounds over the Abarth, and yeah, it's double what the 360 weighs. It's an interesting one, certainly. Of course, this car came into Forza Horizon 3. It was a barn find. They did eventually release the saloon version of this car for Horizon 3. For whatever reason, that didn't return in Motorsport 7. So we do have the Ute, which probably would have been the slower of the two anyway, because the Ute obviously has to have more weight. to keep it secure on the back, unless they literally just chopped the arse off it, in which case maybe it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, the Ute's fun. You can do silly things with it. It's not quite a great car when you upgrade it or anything like that, and to be honest with you, stock, it's very weird. It's actually a rather difficult car to drive. This is probably the most challenging car to drive that has 60 brake horsepower. Most of that is just down to the fact that it's got an awful differential that really likes to pull the car into the corner, which, sure, that's fine in stuff like your Hellcats and stuff, which sure have dodgy diffs, but they're quick, so you don't, you know, the actual turn-in things are almost, I don't want to say it's a benefit, because it really isn't, but it doesn't affect the car too much. With this, it actually drags it into the corner, which means you lose a lot of speed. So realistically, you do actually need to sort of tap steer this thing, which is a little bit strange, a little bit weird to get used to. You can't say I ever really fully got used to it, but I had to because our next car has a sort of a similar issue. This is the 1946 Ford Super Deluxe station wagon. 100 horsepower, 180 foot-pound torque, 3,490 pounds of weight. This is the most powerful car here today, the most torquey car here today, and the heaviest car here today. When 100 horsepower is the most powerful car of today, you certainly know we've got some very heavy beasts on our radar. Yeah, I do really like the Super Deluxe. I love these sort of wooded station wagons that exist in America. Unfortunately, they sort of way fell out of fashion during the 80s, and you had stuff like the LeBaron, which kind of kept hold of it, and I believe the last woody wagon I can think of was like, I think the Chevy Caprice had some wood on the side of it or something. Yeah, these wooden wagons, unfortunately, would be victims of moving on culture, but still, I love a good woody wagon, and this one is a proper original woody wagon, where woody wagons were actually kind of built by wood. You can actually see that if you go in the interior view, you can see all the screws in the wood and everything. It's quite a hilarious car to sort of drive around in. Yeah, it is kind of like the Holden in the sense that you do have to tap steer, otherwise the differential will try to kill you. It's not quite as bad as that though. It's actually nicer to drive than the Holden. Between the two, I would totally take this over the Holden, not just because it's more powerful and so on and so forth, because it's not quite as hard to drive. You do still have to tap the steering and be very light on the steering, but it's not that terrible. It does have more body roll than the Holden, but again, that could be just subject to the fact that it's got more power than the Holden. I've spoken about this a few times, sort of when you get to these sort of cars, power does become more of an advantage to lightweight, and that's what we really felt with the Super Deluxe station wagon. While it's not as nice to drive as some of the earlier cars because it has so much more power despite weighing a lot more, which technically means the power to weight ratio is sort of on par with those other cars, it does still make it a quicker car. And finally today, the 1967 Volkswagen 1600 L Sedan, 65 horsepower, 87 foot-pound torque, 2,116 pounds of weight. Wanted something a little bit interesting to end the show off. I'd say that. We've had a whole host of interesting cars today, but yeah, wanted something, I guess is a little bit more normal, but a car you wouldn't really think about too much. This got added in DLC not too long ago, and I can't say I've ever seen a single person actually use the 1600L, which is a bit of a shame because it's probably my favourite of all the classic Volkswagens in this game. Much like a classic Volkswagen and like a lot of the cars that we've had here today, it is rear-engined, rear-wheel drive. In fact, that's another thing this episode is probably going to be famous for, having the most rear-engined cars, unless we do like an episode on Porsches or something. Yeah, the 1600L, don't know too much about this. I believe this was basically the more practical Beetle. I think it caught on more. I think in Brazil this thing was very popular, but elsewhere in the world not so much. As far as it goes to drive, honestly, pretty good. It is, I kind of like it. It's almost like the 360 in the sense that you can sort of chuck it into a corner and let the mechanical grip take it around. Obviously, you do actually need to be using the brakes in this, unlike in the 360 where you could basically go flat out everywhere. This car, while sure it doesn't have nowhere near the power of a modern car or anything like that, you do still have to be using the brakes because the car won't quite turn in. This one does actually suffer from a little bit of understeer. I'm not quite sure if that's a limit of the chassis or if it's just the fact that the engine isn't in the front to provide some weight over the front, because the front wheels will sort of drift out. But if you can get that sorted, yeah, this is actually a pretty good car. I'd kind of like to see what one of these is like, sort of fully modified and with a little bit more power. I can imagine it's quite a hoot to drive in an 01 make race series or something. Onto the leaderboard then, and of course we will be sitting at the bottom of the board for today's episode. The fastest car today was the 1600L, going into 220th place with a 150.378, not that far off a Nissan Safari Turbo Diesel. Just underneath that, by about a second, is the Ford Super Deluxe Station Wagon, which is one of the longest names we've ever had on this board. Goes into 221st place with 151.555, beating out the Deluxe that we had last time round by not that much of a margin, so in 14 years they managed to go not all that much quicker. In 224th place, we find the Holden Fx Ute, probably down to its power. 156.917 does mean it is 5 seconds slower than the Willys Jeep, but it does beat out the Volkswagen Beetle. Moving down once again, 226th place, above 595 with a 201.017. Couldn't quite beat the Beetle, but it's still a huge amount of fun to drive, and I do recommend checking that car out. The Citroen CV would just edge out the Subaru 360, going to 227th place with a 204.486. The Subaru 360 would end in 228th place with a 204.941, and finally, way down at the bottom, in 229th place, the BMW Isetta with a 225.244. The only way that car is going to be beaten out in being the slowest is if I decide to drive a car backwards around this track or something. And even then, I think a backwards Regera might actually end up beating the Isetta. Anyways, I want to thank you all very much for sticking through this episode. I appreciate it. It is a very, very long one. Next time, we're going to be taking a look at another sort of interesting theme. I'm going to be taking a look at prize crate cars. I'm going to pull cars out of the prize crate system, which I believe is actually going away soon, so I really should hop on that quickly. Yeah, I'm going to pull random cars out of the crates. We're going to see what we get, and then they're going to take on the Top Gear track. Anyways, thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, farewell.
I never speed down, never slow up. Please slow it on up. I can't slow down. Once you slow it on up, I can't slow down. Please speed it on down.